where you can scan questions for our conversation, so you can ask questions to the Honorable Reverend Dr. Warnock and our pastor, Reverend Dr. Otis Moss, on Dancing in the Darkness. So if you don't feel comfortable scanning the QR code on the other side, you have the opportunity to write in questions. All we ask is that you make it legible for us to read so that we can ask them. So if you do not mind, please fill that out. This is an engaging conversation, and we look forward to getting started soon. Oh, once you're done, please bring it up. We'll have a table right here, and you can bring it up to our table.
All right, want the chairs at? I grab it from the bottom. So how, is we gonna be able to get 14? No, just three. She gonna stay over there. She gonna stay over there. Oh. Yeah. The other one's too down. Yeah. Oh. Thanks so much. You're welcome. Do y'all want this here? Like, do y'all want this here? Yeah. To be able to pass it down? You gonna get ready to stand up? You are so. Look, let me move it back for real, because I don't want you. Yeah, exactly. So stop it. Because I already played the one. I think that was okay. So y'all good? Oh, is that the table for us? Yes, the microphone closer to Diamond, so she'll be able to ask the question. Oh, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. You got stuff to do. You got stuff to do. I'm trying to sit in the front. Oh, okay. Oh, nice. Those are nice. Yes. Yes, they are. You go upstairs. What we're gonna do?
Hello, everybody. You all doing well? Wonderful, wonderful. We'll be starting in just a few moments. Thank you very much for gathering with us for the book notes. I'm so delighted that my friend, Dr. Warnock, will be with us for this conversation. And I also want to thank C-SPAN, which will be broadcasting this book notes. And we are very appreciative of them coming in. And those of you who watch C-SPAN, they just turn on the camera. And just let it roll. Just let it roll. So just in a few moments, when they're ready in the back up there, we'll be starting. Well, we want to take this moment to welcome everyone to Trinity United Church of Christ here in Chicago, Illinois. We are a church that believes that we are called to be in the heart of this community, ever seeking the community's heart. And our motto is that we are unashamedly black and unapologetically Christian. We don't think that there is any contradiction between rooting yourself in your culture and also celebrating the Christ in whom we serve. And so we're delighted that you're here for our book notes. We had a wonderful worship experience today, two worship services with a magnificent preacher who is to my left, none other than Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, who is Senator Raphael Warnock. He was the first African-American senator from the state of Georgia. He has two publications, one being A Way Out of No Way, which is a memoir of his experience from Savannah all the way to the Senate, and a wonderful children's book he read to a small group of children immediately following worship service today. We recorded that reading that we hope that these young people will be able to look back and say that they had the first African-American senator from Georgia to read a children's book to them. And that book is a wonderful story that shares the experience of Dr. Warnock as a child all the way up to being sworn in as senator. And it's, get ready, put your shoes on. Is that right? Get ready? Put your shoes on? Put your shoes on and get ready. Put your shoes on and get ready. And it's some beautiful art, wonderful story. So we are delighted that you are with us. We're going to have a word of prayer, and then we're going to begin our conversation. We do this book note series. We've been doing it throughout the pandemic, talking to different authors and having conversation about their work, and it has exploded here at Trinity, where we just thought we'd have a few book nerds to watch, where sometimes we get over 1,000 people who watch live for the Book Notes conversation. So let's have a word of prayer, and we're going to begin our conversation. Gracious and most merciful God, in whom we live, move, and have our being, we are grateful for this moment and grateful for this time in history. May you empower us that we may be able to link love and justice together in all of the work that we do. May your Spirit rest, may it rule, may it abide, that we may continue to walk the path that has been laid for us. We thank you, we love you, and we magnify your name. And the people of God who love God may collectively say, amen. Dr. Warnock?
Well, hello, Trinity United Church of Christ. It's great to be here with my friend and dear brother, the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, your pastor and someone I've known since we were teenagers at Morehouse College, and it's great to be back here. Welcome to all of the folks who are watching us online. I am excited to be here to talk about Dr. Moss's latest book, Dancing in the Darkness. Dancing in the Darkness, Spiritual Lessons for Thriving Through Turbulent Times. That's rich. There's a lot even in the title. Dancing in the Darkness, Spiritual Lessons for Thriving Through Turbulent Times. I think that is something, those are lessons that all of us could use at a time like this. So I'm going to start with the most basic question. What motivated you? What drove you to write this particular book, to frame it in this particular way? You preach every Sunday. You also write. But tell us about the inspiration behind Dancing in the Darkness.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that question. I realized several years ago that there was truly a spiritual itch in our country that people are attempting to scratch in a variety of ways. Some through social media, others thinking that, hey, if I have enough funds, the market will be able to scratch that itch. But we still find that we are spiritually anemic. And there is a necessity for us to go back to the values that enrich in us, that allow us to flourish as human beings. And the two main values really flowing in the book, that haunt the book, are the values of love and justice. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Howard Thurman serve as sages for talking about those values.
And so you're driven by that, but tell me a little bit more about what is it that you're seeing as a pastor on the ground. What are the things that you carry in your bones as you engage people, everyday people, as they make their way through their everyday struggles? How has that inspired this preaching in a different way?
The experience of trying to make sense of our trauma, the experience of trying to make sense of the sun going down in many ways for some in this democracy. People are trying to really make sense of what is happening in this world. And we have been reaching for that which is physical in order to scratch this itch. But Howard Thurman, Dr. King, there's so much within the black spiritual tradition that speaks about how we deal with these issues. We both went to Morehouse College. And at Morehouse, and I see another Morehouse brother who is in the audience, they were always told to light a candle. We talked about the candle in the dark and how every Morehouse student was told that when you come into the chapel, that God places a crown above our heads, that we will spend the rest of our lives growing tall enough to wear. And I hope that the book teaches people to stretch, not that we'll wear the crown, but at least you'll be taller after ingesting some of the values. And you do the kind of work at Ebenezer, where you are calling people to stretch. And now, as senator, you are making these demands. You are lighting candles. As a matter of fact, you're on the agricultural committee. And you've done something really interesting that I think that people should know.
Well, I do a lot of work on the Agriculture Committee. I'm proud of being on that committee. Agriculture is the largest business still in Georgia. And we've done many things from helping Georgia farmers to get their products to market when they were dealing with trade barriers. We did $6 billion of debt relief for farmers who are on the margins. And it's one of the reasons I tolerate politics. I'm an elected official, but I am not in love with politics. I'm in love with change. And I tolerate politics because every now and then you're able to do something amazing, like $6 billion of debt relief for farmers. And much of this a long time coming. And also this year, we every 5 years, you do something called the Farm Bill, which interestingly links the concerns of farmers and agribusiness, but also food security and nutrition. Programs like TANF, Temporary Aid for Needy Families. Those programs that we've used to give people basic food security in this country, they're all a part of the Farm Bill that gets redone every 5 years. So I'm on the committee. I was saying this morning in worship, I guess that's what you're referring to. In my sermon, I was referring to the fact that when I went to the Capitol in 2017, I got arrested intentionally in the tradition of Howard Thurman and Martin Luther King Jr. and Morehouse College. I got arrested protesting what they were getting ready to do in the Farm Bill, cut needed nutrition. And this year, 6 years later, I get to write the Farm Bill. So I'm struck by this idea that you put forward of dancing in the darkness. I want to underscore dancing. There's no question that there's darkness, and we could talk about that, and you could elaborate that if you cared to, but I think we all have a sense of the darkness. Of course, Howard Thurman talks about the luminous darkness, the luminous darkness. Right. So, but you didn't say negotiate the darkness. You didn't say how to grope your way through the darkness. You know, how not to be afraid of the dark. I got two little kids. But you said dancing in the darkness. What's at stake in that metaphor of literally dancing in the darkness?
Well, to first bring you to how that idea came about, it starts in 2008. Our church was going through a challenging moment when an individual by the name of Senator Barack Obama was running for president. I had just become pastor here at Trinity. And I remember being in Bally's at Hyde Park. I was working out, and I was on the treadmill, and Marlon, I was sitting there on the treadmill doing my warm down, and someone taps me on the shoulder. They said, "Hey, Rev, is that your church?" And I look up on the screen, and Sean Hannity was going off about Trinity, and I said, "I gotta go." And so there began walking through the gauntlet. 40 news outlets showed up to our church every single Sunday, putting microphones in people's face, looking for some type of quote, because they had parsed a portion of my predecessor's sermon, Dr. Jeremiah A. Wright Jr. It was a very good sermon, by the way, I might add. Absolutely. And they were trying to use that sound bite because many people had never been in a black church and don't know anything about the black church tradition or prophetic preaching. And so that started the gauntlet. But then from the gauntlet, because of the news footage and the attention, we then started getting death threats. Dr. Wright, myself, and the church. And some people here remember that we had to have bomb-sniffing dogs show up every single Sunday to make sure that the sanctuary is safe. And so after getting these letters, and I read some of the letters, I should not have read some of the letters, to be quite honest. And I want to thank Deacon Wilford Bentley. He said, let me have that, you're not going to read any more. My mind was always racing. And every time I ran up to someone or I was running, just working out, I was wondering if I saw someone coming my way, I said, is this it? Is this the person from the letter? So one night, didn't sleep very much for about a year. We heard something in the house, and Monica tapped me and said, you gotta go check that out. And I said, yeah, babe, let me go do that. And so I got up and I grabbed my rod and my staff that comforts me. And that rod and staff was made in Louisville. It was a Louisville Slugger. And I was walking around the house looking for where was this noise coming from, what was going on. And then I heard the noise again. And the noise was coming from my daughter's bedroom. And Michaela was about 5 years old at the time. I go into the bedroom, and Michaela's in the middle of her room, and she's dancing, spinning around. And she's saying, look, Daddy, I'm dancing. Now, it's 3 a.m. I have to preach at Trinity in several hours. And so I got that low-registered dad talk. Baby, you need to go to bed right now. And she says, look, Daddy, I'm dancing. And pigtails are hitting and whatnot. And then the Spirit said, stop. Look at her. She's dancing in the darkness. The darkness is around her, but it's not in her. When are you going to learn how to dance? And at that moment, I trashed my sermon I was supposed to preach. And I just started writing notes, and I stepped into the pulpit on that Sunday, and I talked about the fact that we must learn how to dance in the dark. And when we reclaim our dance, that dance of love, that dance of compassion, that dance of justice, then we can transform, in the words of W.E.B. Du Bois, these yet-to-be United States of America. And I believe that that is what especially people of African descent have learned to do in America, is that we've learned how to dance in the darkness of a country that many times marginalized us, did not see us, or said that we were only 3/5 of a human being. But yet, Sojourner Truth says, ain't I a woman? That's dancing. You know, Frederick Douglass, when he stands and talks about July 4th, that's dancing. Ida B. Wells, that's dancing. These are all of the dance partners, our ancestors, that we must learn how to navigate these moments that we think are dark. But the beautiful thing about darkness is not that the sun has forsaken you. It just means that the earth has turned. And if you keep dancing, eventually your mourning will become dancing, but your joy will come in the morning because the sun hasn't left. It's still there. It's just that the earth decided to turn in a different direction.
Otis Moss. That's why folk listen every Sunday. Powerful. Dancing in the darkness. And that darkness, you were literally living through it in the moment. And you were inspired by your daughter. And then that you described something going on in the country at that time and your church at the center of it. But then layered on top of that are the episodes of trauma that we all know individually, right? So the church is going through what it's going through, but you still have members who are dealing with whatever they were dealing with in their everyday lives. The person who just got a scary diagnosis, person who's trying to understand how to reconcile with their child, or the reverse. All of these concerns, and a spirituality that speaks to both.
Yes, yes.
Both the individual and the social. That deals with the slavery of sin and the sin of slavery. Yes. And I think that has been part of the genius of the black church experience at its best. Yes. Not that we always do that, right? But the evangelical and liberationist tendencies both informing, and I see both of those things standing up in your work, which is itself a kind of dance between a kind of personal piety and the fight for justice, the struggle and the song, as I was trying to talk about this morning. Yeah. And it's a particular kind of dance, wouldn't you say? You've talked about living in a post-soul world in some of your other publications. And you are somebody who in your preaching and in your writing often engages the arts and music and tradition. You understand that gospel and jazz and the blues and the spirituals all come from the same root, the anguished ruminations of a subjugated people speaking to God in their own voice. So the dance, if you will, is syncopated, right? Can you say something about that? Like it's jazz, like it's on the upbeat rather than the downbeat.
That's right. It's the beautiful thing about our tradition. The beautiful thing about black spirituality is that we embrace the existential, but we keep looking at the eschatological. So we are blues and gospel at the same time. And the beautiful thing about people who make the claim, oh, I just listen to gospel music, that gospel music is structured on this pentatonic scale, this African scale. So you can't have gospel music unless you know blues chords. So in other words, you can't have resurrection unless you have
Say it again for the sanctified folks.
You can't have gospel music unless you have blues chords. So in order to sing gospel, you got to know the blues chords. So in other words, you've got to know the anguish and the pain in order to get to the celebration of resurrection. But in a modern society, we want to cast aside the blue notes and only want to do resurrection celebration. And if that happens...
Are you talking about prosperity preaching?
I'm talking about prosperity preaching, without a doubt. Prosperity preaching is problematic because it's not Christianity. It is capitalism with ecclesiastical garments. And we have witnessed so much of this market-centeredness. But our tradition is, like you said, a jazz tradition. I mean, Brother Millard is here. He's doing research on Wynton Marsalis and the blues and whatnot. But jazz teaches America about democracy before America knew what democracy was all about. I mean, the fact that jazz is born in New Orleans, first off. This space where you have indigenous people in America, along with Spanish, along with French, and along with people of African descent, but don't forget that a good portion of black people in New Orleans were free blacks from Haiti. So they understood this idea of freedom, and then they come and they infect New Orleans with that. And so the Congo Square was the space where on Sunday, because there were so many people who were Catholic, Sunday you had off, that they could hear all these different rhythms, and all these different rhythms come together. And then jazz does something that no other music had done in history. It takes what's not supposed to play together, and they play together. So you have a saxophone, that is for the marching band, but then it plays with the piano, which is European classical. Then the piano then plays with a trap drum set, but instead of using a simple European syncopated marching rhythm, it uses a pentatonic and also polyrhythms in the process. Then you have a bass that you're supposed to play with a bow, but somebody says, let me play with my fingers. And then everybody has the right to solo. In other words, I can bring my own cultural narrative to the table, bring my own experience to the table, and I can solo. But the saxophone never tells the piano, you have to sound like me. And the piano doesn't tell the drum, you have to sound like me. And the bass doesn't tell the piano, you got to sound like me. Everybody gets a chance to sing their song, as you said this morning, in a unique way. And when America learns how to operate with a jazz democratic ethic, that's when, in the words of John Coltrane, we'll see a love supreme.
All right. That's good stuff, right? Get the book, Dancing in the Darkness. Spiritual Lessons for Thriving Through Turbulent Times. Good stuff. This dancing and this music you talk about is also improvisational.
Yes.
Each of the instruments, they each play in their own way, but they don't go off anywhere. They're variations on a theme.
That's right.
So there's a theme, and the improvisations are variations on the theme, and there's a kind of style and a friendly rivalry sometimes going on. And a good jazz musician, like a good preacher, they might have a manuscript, but they're going to see each time what the Spirit is going to bring. It might be a little different each time. How are we doing in around the question of improvisation in this moment? The church in particular.
I think the church is struggling with improvisation because it's looking to be a symphony directed by people who do not necessarily care for the folks who are in the church. Because a symphony has a director and says, play just like me. But when we move to that jazz narrative, we begin to look inwardly. We begin to draw from our tradition. So I would use the example that prosperity ministry, in these framings of it's about the dollar, and that's how you will be set free. That's kind of symphonic in the way that a director is playing. Or to say that ministry must be solely individualistic. We don't talk about stuff that goes on in the world. We're going to just talk about just me, myself, and I. I mean, there's a phrase called, I am blessed and highly favored, that people like to say. Nothing wrong with the phrase, but the idea that blessing within the Hebraic framework, blessing within the black church, was you really can't be blessed until other people are blessed in the process. That there's a connectivity to the idea of blessing. But our country is struggling with this on multiple levels. So when we add to the curriculum Black history, the conductors say you can't do that because that is something that is not necessarily patriotic. As some states have said, you can't have AP, African American history.
They said it had no educational value.
Which is amazing that you can have AP Italian history, AP Japanese history, AP French history, but there's no educational value to the labor and genius that helped build this country. That's problematic.
Anybody who says that needs an education.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But yeah, this idea of improvisation, I'm struck by that because we're on the other side of we're still going through a pandemic. And the church is being forced to rethink how it presents familiar themes. Tell me about love and justice in the book. You talk a lot about love and justice, and you insist that we have to have them both.
You can't have one without the other. So the first chapter is linking love and justice, which are two important values, spiritual values that we need not only personally, but also in the civic arena. If we would make our policies rooted in love and justice, we would have different policies. So in America, we have this sentimental love. You know, love without justice is sentimentality. Justice without love becomes legalism or brutality. But when you marry love and justice, they walk down the aisle and they eventually have two children, one named Liberation, the other named Transformation, when they get together. But imagine when we think through policies based on love and justice. That's what the Poor People's Campaign was about. That is what the pulpit of Ebenezer has been about, linking love and justice. You can't disengage. And that is what the ministry of Jesus was about, meaning I redeem you, this idea of redemption over retribution. We have a retribution system when it comes to incarceration, not a redemption system, not a development system, not an education system. We have a pure punishment vengeance system. Love and justice linked together raises the question, what will our society be, and what do we leave for children who've not been born?
What are the spiritual dragons that we need to slay in this moment? You talk about that in the book.
Cynicism. The idea that I have no power, that I'm not able to change what is going on in the world. This chapter on slaying dragons, and another chapter that I deal with called Reworking Your Origin Stories, that talks about the fact that you've got to know your origin stories. And I use, because I'm a comic book person, I'm a comic book geek, I admit it, that the reason we love heroes, the reason we love these stories, whether it's Marvel, or whether you're reading about Storm or Luke Cage or whatever it may be, we love these stories of these heroes, but no hero can be a hero or a shero until they know their origin story. And they make a decision. They make a decision whether on which path that they're going to flow. And the way in which we slay our dragons is we come to embrace who we are. As you said this morning, that we must know who we are. We must know who God is. We must know what God has done, as you said in your sermon this morning. And the same thing goes for us individually. When you know who you are and you make that decision. I'll give you a prime example, a more personal example. I've told the story many times over and over again about the suicide of my sister. My sister Daphne, she's the brilliant person in our family, and she was a graduate of Spelman College, also a graduate of Kent State University. She taught students who had learning differences and were challenged in their growth and development. And she's the one that introduced me to Zora Neale Hurston and James Baldwin, and those were my children's stories, that she would read those stories to me. For years, I was afraid of that story. I didn't want to share that story, nor could I say anything. I'd say, oh yeah, my sister had a terminal illness or something of that nature. But the moment that I reworked my origin story, that I realized that I had a brilliant, wonderful sister who had a mental illness, who had given me an incredible gift and could speak about it without shame, I found out that there was a community of people who had the same experience. And we were empowered in sharing that story together. America has a problem sharing the truth of its history. The moment we can share the truth of our history is the moment we rework our origin story and we can see something better in the future. But as long as we hide in shame, can't teach black history, can't teach indigenous history, can't talk about this, then we will continue down the same path that is destructive in this nation.
Wonderful. I'm deeply moved by the way in which you link your own story, your own pain, connected to Daphne and what she provided. This beautiful soul who had a sickness, an illness. And it's something I talk about a lot and try to push forward as a pastor. I've counseled members of my church, and one member came to me and she was really wrestling with depression. Said, I'm praying about it, Pastor. I said, well, we're going to pray, but I also need you to come with me and get some other help. And we're going to pray with the doctors.
Yes.
Because if you had a heart condition or something else, we pray and we tell you go to the doctor. Right. We would treat the heart or the liver or whatever it is like an organ. Well, the brain is an organ. Mm-hmm. The brain is an organ. And so sometimes some counseling, sometimes some medication is important. A chemical imbalance is a chemical imbalance. That's right. Doesn't matter which organ it is, chemical imbalance. And then there's a spirituality undergirding that. But I'm also moved by the way in which you're connecting that piece, the individual piece, to this larger American family story. And you're right, all families, and we know this as pastors, all families have a complicated story. Come on. Yours too. Right? And the story is always more complicated than the picture we present. coming down the aisle on Sunday morning exactly 20 minutes after worship starts so people can see your beautiful family. Everything is intact, red bottom shoes, hair in place. The children look so perfect and well behaved. And we know the truth because they're in our Sunday school, in our children's church. Yeah. We know all about your little angels. And if you really want to know the real family story, you got to go to the family reunion.
Come on.
And you'll get some of it, but not in the first 15 minutes or even the first hour.
Just wait.
You got to wait sometimes till a few people have had communion.
That's right.
And then you'll get some piece of the family story and but at the end of the day, you know, after somebody got cussed out or whatever, what do? All hug each other. I love my family. I'll see y'all next week. Yeah, maybe it's just my family. You don't get to pick your family. Your family is your family. They're complicated, but it's still your family. And so the American family story is like the rest of our family stories.
That's right.
It's complicated, but we are all we got.
That's right.
And I mean that. I mean that for folks who ain't ready to say that to me. We are all we got. Where are we going? And I mean that in a larger scale, beyond just our country. We are all we got. Mm-hmm. And if spirituality doesn't help us to deal with that, then what in the world are we doing? But part of what we've got to do is something else you tell us in the book. We've got to consecrate the chaos. Consecrate the chaos. That's very provocative, right? Doesn't that make you want to come closer? And I want to learn. I want to hear more. Tell us about consecrating the chaos.
You know, that particular chapter has received kind of an interesting buzz from a lot of people when they ask about this consecrating chaos. And I really love that chapter. And we were looking at the idea that spiritually, we will all experience chaos. You can't get rid of it. It's going to happen. And for those who operate out of more of a scientific and secular framework, chaos is a part of the cosmos. You can't get rid of chaos, but you can consecrate it. You can name it, and you can employ it for your particular benefit. So how do we consecrate chaos? Anyone who sails knows how to deal with chaos. Because a sailor, I'm not talking about the motorboats and them folk who got yachts. I'm talking about people who sail. In other words, they have to harness the wind and deal with the waves and the undertow at the same time. They have to build a boat that has a rudder and a keel to balance. But then they also have to have a sail that catches the wind. They can't control which way the wind's going to go, but they can move the sail to catch the wind. And here's the beautiful thing about people who sail. They can never sail in a straight line. They have to tack left and right to get to their destination. And so one of the things that I think that black people have done is that we have built these spiritual sails and boats, whether you're talking about abolition or the Jim Crow period, but Black Lives Matter. They built a digital sail in order to deal with the chaos that was happening in our community in order to consecrate it and to educate people at a higher level. And we have to teach this generation that chaos is going to come. And we cannot lie from the pulpit and say, just name it and claim it, and the chaos will disappear. Chaos is going to be a part. The question is, how will we engage it? And we have the power. I keep thinking about, I love stories, I traffic in stories. I love Frederick Douglass. I mean, Frederick is the man. That's a bad brother. Monica says she just loves the picture. She thinks he's so handsome. She's like, back in the day, I would have been looking at Frederick, you know. She's like, he's handsome, he's handsome, he's handsome. You know, he was the most photographed human being in the 19th century because he understood the technology that we knew as taking pictures. But Frederick Douglass did something fascinating to me, is that here he is in the chaos of enslavement. He was told, you can't read. You're not supposed to read. When he was living in Baltimore, Marlon, he used to keep pieces of bread in his back pocket. And when he would come up on an Irish young man, you know, someone about 10 or 12, he said, I'll give you some bread if you tell me that word. And so he taught himself how to read by passing out bread. Then another experience of this chaos with Frederick Douglass is when he is beaten by an overseer. And he runs away. He runs into the woods. But he encounters a prophet slash priest slash medicine man who then tells him that, you know you a child of God? I'm going to give you some roots right here. You wear this over on the left side, and you go back and you tell that overseer you a child of God. And he went back and told him. He beat him for 2 hours and said, I'm a child of God. Don't you ever beat me again. Which was an incredible thing for this enslaved African to say that I am a human being. And he continues on with these moments. Every time that there was a moment of chaos, he says, I'm going to employ it for my good. If there is something that explodes nationally, I'm going to use it to communicate the suffering of my people. And Douglass was a genius at dealing with issues of chaos and the black struggle. Over and over again, chaotic moments, and yet we come up with these creative times to be able to demonstrate how we can operate at a different level in this nation. That's what the black tradition, the black church at its best, but black spirituality. You ain't even got to go to church. There's just some stuff that's in us that we can share with the world if we are willing to drink from these reservoirs.
Beautiful. So, and going back to your earlier metaphor, and I saw Reverend Wood shaking his head. He sails, believe it or not. We got a preacher right here who sails. He's got a lot of faith. So, tack left, tack right. Can't go on a straight line. Tack left. That's right. Can you tell the Congress that we got to tack left, tack right in order to overcome gridlock, in order to move forward? That's right. All right. So you also talked about your origin stories, and I'm remembering now that in the book you give a shout out to Auburn Avenue.
Yes, indeed.
Auburn Avenue, that's Sweet Auburn in Atlanta, Georgia, where Ebenezer Baptist Church sits. And tell us about Auburn Avenue and origin stories and consecrating chaos.
Well, you are the child of the beauty and the power of Auburn Avenue. That before you, not only Dr. King and Daddy King, but William Holmes Borders, John Wesley Dobbs, Alonzo Herndon. Now, these names may not mean anything, and I deal with these traffic in these names and stories in the book. But let me give you an example. I learned this from my father. If you want to understand the power of Auburn with this particular story, imagine with me. Dr. King, age 12, steps out of his house. He steps out of his home, and on one side of his home, on the side of the street where his home is, middle-class homes, doctors, lawyers, business owners. But on the other side, gunshot homes, shotgun houses on the other side. There you have people who are domestics, people who are struggling. Then he turns and begins to walk to Ebenezer Baptist Church. Before he gets to Ebenezer, but on Sweet Auburn, he has to pass by the Harbinger Brooks Funeral Home, which was owned by a black woman, the only funeral home owned by a black woman in the state of Georgia at the time. So he was seeing someone breaking the ceiling of patriarchy before he got to church. Then he has to pass by, or he would go by maybe the Atlanta Daily World, which was the only daily black newspaper that lifted up lynching but also lifted up the power of HBCUs. Then he passed by WERD, that's Word Radio, a black radio station that was lifting up not only black churches, but was giving the news that was happening across the city. Then he passes by the Atlanta Life Insurance Company, and the Atlanta with Alonzo Herndon, and this insurance company was the insurance company that the funding that Alonzo Herndon received from this was bailing people out of jail during the Freedom Movement. Then he passes by the AME Church, Mother Bethel, not Mother Bethel, but to Bethel, where Bishop Henry McNeil Turner was at one time pastor. Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, before James Cone said black theology, he said God is black before anybody else was even saying it. So he had this black theological framework. And then he would pass by the Alexander Life Insurance Company, which was the company that ended up insuring cars in Montgomery. When they had the Montgomery bus boycott, they were doing carpooling. So the city of Montgomery said, we're going to stop these black folk from even driving together. And they would pull black people over and say, if you had more than one person in your car, you were trying to act like a taxi service, and we will take you in and arrest you and place you in jail. Well, it was Alexander Insurance Company, T.M. Alexander, Morehouse graduate, who ends up insuring all of these station wagons in Montgomery along with church buses. But he couldn't get insurance in the United States. He had to fly to England to the Lloyds of London to get insurance to insure all of these cars. So black folk had Uber before there was Uber in Montgomery, Alabama. And then he would pass by Wheat Street Baptist Church, where William Holmes Borders was the pastor. And William Holmes Borders was 6'5", graduate of Morehouse also, and had this booming voice, and William Holmes Borders would many times close his message with poetry. And a poem you've all heard, because Reverend Jesse Jackson has remixed this poem. It's called I Am Somebody. I am somebody in Langston Hughes. I am a great poet. I am an aviator in Bessie Strong. I am a musician in Duke Ellington. I am somebody. I'm an activist in Ida B. Wells. And at 12 years old, could you imagine Dr. King in the balcony of a Wheat Street before he even goes to his own church? And William Holmes Borders was also played Jesus in the Atlanta City Passion Play. So as a child, he saw a 6'5" black Jesus with a deep voice. So he already had the framing. Then he goes to his own church to hear his father preach. Then decides to get on a trolley that would take him to Morehouse College. But he had to get in the back of the trolley because of segregation. And my father says it this way. He says his body went in the back, but his mind was in the front, because he had so much somebodiness in his spirit. Then he arrives on the campus of Morehouse College, and a person by the name of Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays becomes his mentor. Before you get to Boston and Crozier, you got to stop by Auburn Avenue and see all of this, quote, somebodiness, because his origin story was reworked from the origin story of white supremacy to the idea of black resiliency. And that was the brilliance of what Auburn Avenue has given to generation after generation. And you are the son of that tradition, being a senator, the first African-American senator from the state of Georgia, because of the work of those great people on Auburn Avenue.
Thank you. I feel like dancing. In the darkness. Let's hear from my friend, brother, author, preacher, filmmaker. This brother's got too many gifts. The Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III.
And let's give it up for our senator, none other than Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock.
Dancing in the darkness.
Now we have some questions, I believe, that are coming from the audience or from online.
Yes, so if you are still working on some questions, please bring them to the table. But we'll start with the first question. All right. This question is coming from Kelly. Kelly asks, most people find fear in darkness, but from reading your book, it appears that you find power in darkness. How did you develop the confidence to navigate what you cannot see?
You know, that's a wonderful question, Kelly. Is that growing up in my family, I learned from my mother and from my father the power of darkness, meaning that you don't need to fear it, it's something that naturally happens. The beautiful thing is that the reason that we're able to see in this moment is that sight is based on electromagnetic waves, what we consider to be the light. And what's fascinating is that human beings, we have limited sight, that there are other creatures that God has created that are able to see in the dark. And this is what helped me when I was a child. One time I was scared of the dark, and my dad said, he just said, well, whatever's in the light is in the dark too. And I said, that's true. So all the stuff I see in the light is in the dark also. And I held on to that idea that he shared with me years ago. But the thing is, we develop our power in the dark. We were formed in darkness. We have to spend 9 months in the dark before we can come into the light. God decided to consecrate the darkness and bring something out of it. It is in those moments when we are quiet and silent and recognize that we have to depend on something else than our sight. Anyone can handle when you can see it. But when you are in a moment where you can't see it, can't hear it, and you just have to trust, is when you deepen your faith. And that's what the call is for us, is to hold on to such values, hold on to these spiritual ideas that deepen our faith, even though we can't see it, even though we don't know when it's going to happen. And I believe that that's something that we all must learn, is to be able to how to handle the darkness.
Thank you. Next question is from Ari. How do you build a movement of love, kindness, and unity at a time when people at the highest rung of power are trying to sow hate?
That's great. And I think that it's really important to recognize Pastor Warnock did such a beautiful job today when he talked about every valley being exalted and every mountain being brought low. He said that's good news. You said that's good news for some. For some people, these are people who are high up don't want to come down. We have to realize that the real power is not with those who think they have power. The real power is rooted in the people. The real power is those who deeply believe in the values of love and of justice and compassion and reciprocity. That's where the power is. When history is written, we will not lift up those who had a whole lot of stocks and bonds. We will lift up the names of those who, deep in their heart, held on to particular values, held on to these ideals. And those are the ones that history recognizes over time. So there are more of us than are those at the top. There are more people who are deeply committed to change than there are 1 or 2 people who want to hold on to an old way of doing things. And the moment that we recognize how much power we have, transformation comes. I love the way that Nelson Mandela said it. He said, the moment you realize how powerful you are is when systems begin to shake.
Thank you. The next question is from Lalika. This is for Senator Warnock. She's asking for those that feel that church and state should be separate or struggle with politics being discussed in the pulpit. Being a senator or pastor, how do you find peace in the two callings?
I am a strong proponent of the separation of church and state. That is a part of our democratic system that I Now, I don't just tolerate it, I'm a strong proponent of it. I don't want to live in a theocracy. I'm a Christian and a Christian preacher, but I don't want to live in a theocracy. Not a Islamic one, a Jewish one, or a Christian one. And I want to, Luther has his idea, Martin Luther, about the right kingdom and the left kingdom. I don't want to see the state encroach on the church, and I don't want to see the church encroaching in a kind of religious triumphalism over civil society. You say, well, then, so then at the same time, I don't embrace the idea that politics doesn't belong in the pulpit. Because what is politics? There's a very simple definition of politics. Wherever three or more people are gathered, there you have politics. Because you've got to navigate and negotiate interests. In fact, wherever two people are gathered, sometimes between husband and wife, it's politics. But wherever three people are gathered, you definitely got politics. So here's what you got to understand. I bring the values of my faith to my work in the Senate. And I said this the night I was elected in this last runoff. And I've said it time and time again, that I believe that democracy is the political enactment of a spiritual idea. This notion that each of us has within ourselves a spark of the divine, that we were created in the imago Dei, the image of God. And if we were created in the image of God, then we ought to have a say in the direction of our country and our destiny within it. And even if you're not given to that kind of religious language I said that night, that's fine. Our tent is big. Simply put it this way, we each have value. And if we have value, we ought to have a voice. And the way to have a voice is to have a vote. So the values that I try to frame every public policy issue in are the values that are resonant and resident in all of the great faith traditions and in the souls of people of moral courage who claim no particular faith tradition at all. Love, truth, justice, compassion, empathy. That's what I bring to the Senate. And so whether the issue is the expanded child tax credit, which we passed, we only did it for 6 months. I'm trying to get us to extend it because it would cut child poverty in our country 40 to 50%. Or if the issue is climate change, or if the issue is how do we hold at bay bad actors on the global scale while at the same time not giving in to militarism, as Dr. King described it as one of the triplet evils. I'm always going to try to put these issues in a moral frame. I think there's no shortage of transactional politicians in DC or anywhere else. There's no shortage of transactional politicians. And so if I was just going to be another transactional politician, there's no need in me doing this. There'd be no reason for Ebenezer Church to give its pastor the space to do this as it graciously has if I was just going to show up as another transactional politician. What I'm striving for in the tradition of King and Thurman and Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer is to be transformational. But I'm not, I see very clearly the danger of Christian nationalism and a kind of triumphalism and a impulse to push the particularities and nuances of your faith tradition and inscribe them in law. We're living through the scary side of that right now. And it's the reason why I'm pro-choice. And it's all the religious people, it's the religious people who say the most hateful things to me because I'm pro-choice. I mean, they have tried to show up and really create all kinds of havoc. That was the effort. It didn't work. Like, they must not know what Ebenezer is. They tried, I mean, but they tried it. You're talking about trolling. My church went through it. Them attacking us on social media, attacking all of our platforms, calling me a false prophet, a hypocrite. And I think trying to stir up the members in the process, but they don't understand who Ebenezer is. And Sunday after Sunday. But I'm clear-eyed about this. The question on the issue of choice is whose decision is it? Whose decision is it? And I happen to think that a patient's room is too small and cramped a space for a woman, her doctor, and the United States government. I think that's too many people in the room. But if you value life as I do, it seems to me that you'd be concerned about the criminal rates of maternal mortality in this country, particularly in a state like Georgia, and the fact that black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die than white women, that they're much more likely to die even when they have the same insurance and income. Now, that's something government can do something about. That's why government ought to stay in its lane and do the work the government does and let the church do what the church does.
Thank you. The next question comes from Robert. This question is for Pastor Moss. In chapter 3, Redirecting Your Rage, you speak on Joseph Graves and your call to pastor in turbulent times. What do you say to young people who are constantly losing friends? And how do, at a high rate, what do you say to the young people?
The pain and the trauma that we experience collectively as a community is a national and community problem that we have to place as a priority if we are to see significant change. In the city, I share the story, and I'm thankful to Latanda Graves for allowing me to share the story of Joseph, who was just a beloved young man here at Trinity, and many remember how painful that moment was. And I want to say thank you to many of the brothers who work with our Rites of Passage program, that some of you may not know, I share some of it in the book, that we had some folks here who were ready to take, quote unquote, justice into their own hands. And if it had not been for the men who worked with our young men, we would have had multiple tragedies in this church. And we would have had multiple funerals, or we would have been talking to multiple young people through plexiglass. So I'm just grateful for the men and the work that they did. But let me use the city of Chicago as an example. We need people who are willing to place this as a priority in the city. And we use the wrong language. We keep saying public safety, and we should be saying public health. Because when you say public safety, you're only responding and putting more money in the hands of police officers. Police officers have their role, but if you say public health, then all of a sudden I need to deploy interrupters and social workers. I need to have restorative justice programs in the public schools. We need to change the entire approach. And we need to see every child as valued and valuable that we should mourn collectively instead of mourning just in a community aspect of this is just what happens over here. And so I would say to every young person that we are in the moment where we can change the way this city does business to reverse some of the issues around gun violence. Number one, as Trinity works with the Live Free program, we believe that you've got to have interrupters. Number two, we need to make sure that we fund an Office of Gun Violence Prevention at least by $250 million. We already fund the police by a tune of close to $1 billion, but just an Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And then that would mean people who are deployed in our neighborhood. Do you know that we can predict who will be shot within a radius of something like 50 feet to 100 feet in terms of where someone lives? Based on when one young person is shot, they already have predictive models in terms of who the next person will be. It's like it's a disease. But guess what? The Center of Disease Control in Atlanta cannot use those models because there was a law that was passed specifically by the gun lobby to say that you cannot follow that kind of predictive model because it will affect what? Gun sales. So we have to have a completely different approach. This is about public health and about human flourishing. And we need to demand every alderman, need to demand every mayor, demand every commissioner, demand every person who runs for Congress to say that they have a position on public health. It's not enough to put some more money toward policing because they are responders. We want prevention. And prevention is always cheaper than responding. If you want to spend less money, then let's begin to put money toward prevention. 50 interrupters can do more than 500 police. Let me say it again. 50 interrupters can do more than 500 police officers because their job is prevention. 50 social workers can do more than 500 police officers because their job is prevention. Police officers are responders, and we keep sending money to respond, and we're not doing the work on prevention. Let me give you another example that Richmond, California took a response position. I believe it was probably about 15, 17 years ago. They took a response position. They began to hire brothers who used to be in the life to do the interruption. Within 6 years, they had dropped the gun violence rate by 70% because they took prevention as a priority and not response. They gave every brother a job. They sure did. And they paid them a living wage with insurance. I mean, they could also, take care of their families. They had insurance. And so that's the model that we have. We keep electing people, and we keep allowing gun lobbies to determine what the policy is going to be in Chicago. We know how to fix this. We just need to have people with enough political courage to step forward to be able to do the work that we need done.
This next question is from Deirdre online. The question is for Reverend Warnock. What is the scripture you call on when you walk through the valley of the shadow of death on Capitol Hill? Among those who loudly call on the name of Jesus but do not step in his footsteps.
I call on the rest of that verse. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And I keep walking through the valley. And I know that I wouldn't be there without the prayers of the righteous. And my experience has taught me that with every assignment comes equipment. if it is indeed a divine assignment, if it is a divine assignment, with the assignment will come the necessary equipment, both the things you need and the people you need surrounding you. And so this work has been tough. It's hard work, and it requires a lot of me. I ran for 3 years straight. Now finally I have a 6-year term. I clearly went after this job. My name's been on the ballot 5 times for the same doggone job. But I am amazed with the resources and the support that has shown up. I didn't go running after this. I was asked 3 times to run for the United States Senate. And I said yes only after the 3rd time. And it felt like it was the right time, and I didn't know what that would look like. I didn't know that a month or so after I announced, we would find ourselves in the midst of a strange virus. I announced on January 30th, and in mid-March, the world shut down. How do you campaign in those circumstances? We didn't know how to do anything. We didn't even know how to do church. And there I was trying to figure out how to campaign. First time I'd ever run for public office in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic. But what that did was it brought into sharp focus issues that I've been addressing long before I ran for the Senate, like inequity in our healthcare system. Because while everybody was impacted by COVID-19, we saw reinscribed in the midst of the pandemic the things that we see with chronic illness and all of these issues, access to healthcare. We saw black and brown and poor people dying at a disproportionate rate. And so the pandemic brought into sharp focus things that I've been fighting for years, trying to get Georgia to expand Medicaid, for example. That happened in March. And then a couple months after that, as we were wrestling with COVID-19, we saw the emergence in a tragic way, COVID-16-19. George Floyd, a black man, yet dying again with a knee on his neck. It wasn't the first time we'd all seen that on TV. Because I remember a few years ago, I came here to preach one Sunday, and you had a whole service responding to the killing of Eric Garner. And I preached about that Sunday, and he too choked to death on a New York City street. And I wondered why there wasn't the kind of outpouring of concern that I would have expected in the wake of that. George Floyd wasn't the first time. But something I think about being in the midst of a pandemic, all of us holed up in our homes, nowhere to go. I think it was harder for the country to turn away. And we'd been sitting there in our houses for a couple months anyway, already frustrated. And then the whole country saw this human tragedy unfold. And you couldn't turn away. And as a result of that, we saw a multiracial coalition of conscience pour out into American streets, masked up to protect themselves from one pandemic while waging war against another pandemic. And in the midst of all of that, I was running for the United States Senate, the pastor of Ebenezer Church. And then weeks after that, presiding over the funeral of John Lewis, our great hero. And so I have felt called to this work. And it's the reason why I do it every single day. And I am deeply honored to do it. And while I enjoy the work I'm doing, for me, the Senate is just a tool. The Senate is another tool. But my project is the same that it's always been. Dancing and encouraging others to dance in the darkness. And inspired to be here. I tell more of this story, by the way, in my book, A Way Out of No Way, which is my memoir that came out. Amazon.com, I'm just kidding.
Thank you. This next question is from Eli Hu for Pastor Moss. Many black outlets generate revenue by focusing on the darkness of hate toward our communities. How do we explore what's possible without fearing the darkness limitations?
There is a need and a necessity for us to learn how to celebrate us. The resiliency and the brilliance, that's what I find so beautiful about our history and our stories. I think that we must learn how to traffic in our own stories and be able to share our own stories. And when we begin to share our own stories, we recognize the beauty of those stories. There's this tendency to think that our story is only one type of story. It's only one way. Oh, it's so sad. No, it's absolutely, utterly brilliant and magnificent and incredible. There are even sociologists that study black people to try and figure out how in the world did y'all do this? Because of the literal brilliance, as Dr. Raphael Warnock said. He said, people give us the blues and then we start singing the blues. You know, we have this capacity to be able to be so incredibly resilient. And that comes from our spirituality. And when I say spirituality, I'm not talking denomination. I'm not talking someone's religion. I'm talking about that there are particular inherent values that we recognize that we are all gifts of the sacred, that we all have the spark of the divine, we have the imprint of God, the fingerprints of the Creator on us. And we have to begin to traffic those stories. And guess what? It does not begin by picking up your phone, let me find a good black story. Sometimes you got to go and do something that's called read a book. Not only read a book, you've got to listen to the stories of elders. I was asked the question, I was at Georgetown University for a book signing, and one of our former interns, Minister Mahogany, Thomas, asked this question about stories, and how do you know these stories? I said, well, one, I had the opportunity to hear the stories of my mother, hear the stories of my father, and I listened to them, number one. Number two is our household was filled with books, and all of these fascinating stories that were in these books. And then number three, finding alternative media. For example, the Cleveland Call and Post was a black newspaper that had to highlight, that was one of their jobs. It was named by the name of John Bustamante. John Bustamante, who owned the paper, who was one of the funders of Jesse Jackson's campaign in 1984. He said his responsibility was that he wanted to put stories in the mind of black people that allowed them to fly. That's all he wanted to do. He said he wanted a child to pick up the newspaper, not just look at some pictures, but hear stories of triumph, hear stories of power, hear stories of beauty, and have people sit at the kitchen table and begin to repeat those stories. I'm a preacher. Dr. Raphael Warnock is a preacher. We tell stories. We tell stories about this brother named Jesus. And when you got the right story, it will change your world. If you listen to someone else's story, you will always be beholden to them. It's like this. If you operate under the script that someone else wrote, you will always be a character in their movie. But if you write your own script, you get to be the star and the hero at the same time. So let's start writing our own stories.
He does that, by the way, in Otis's Dream. If you haven't seen that film, you need to see it. It's a great film.
This question is for both of you. This question is from Donna online. How do we prepare the next generation to be ready to carry the mantle of love and justice?
Well, it begins with where Reb ended off. We've got to keep telling the story. One of the most tragic lines, I think, in Scripture can be found in the book of Judges. I believe the 2nd chapter, where it says that then Joshua died, and those in Joshua's generation died. They were gathered up to their ancestors. And the next line is tragic. It says, and there arose a generation that knew not the Lord, nor the work which the Lord had done for Israel. I'm struck by that. They've gone through the Exodus. They've sojourned through the wilderness. They've settled into the land of promise. And Joshua, who takes them into the land of promise, he and his peers are now all gone. And I think about that. Dr. Moss and I were talking earlier about the fact that we are moving within a few years where folks who remember the movement, there will come a time when all the folk who lived through the movement are gone. That's not what was tragic. That's the circle of life. What was tragic was there emerged a whole generation that didn't know Yahweh. They didn't know the God whom Moses met on the side of the mountain, who said, go and tell Pharaoh to let my people go, nor the work which God had done for Israel. So we've got to pass our stories on to our children. And we've got to tell those stories time and time again. And that's what this brother is trying to do and is doing effectively, not only in his book, Dancing in the Darkness, but he does it every Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. And we are trying to find creative ways to do it. I just got through reading to the children in the Sunday school pieces from my children's book. I just released a children's book last week called Put Your Shoes On and Get Ready. And I'm as excited about that book as anything I've ever written. Anything I've ever written, because it's what I try to do is put it where small kids can get it. And we've got to keep doing that. And I think what happens if you're a parent, let me encourage some parent who's listening or some pastor who's listening. The job of teenagers is to be unimpressed with you and to act like they're listening even when they might be sort of listening, or listening and they don't even know they're listening. Some things are taught, most things are caught.
That's right, that's right.
Most things are caught. All of us have been those kids in the back of the church, pastor's talking, half rolling your eyes. Pastor might have been your dad or your mom. But he caught it. He caught the can't help it, and he's doing the same thing his daddy was doing. So be encouraged. You got hit by it.
Sometimes we get hit by it. He's like, can't even caught it. It just hits you in the head. I want to add to what you're saying, because the radicality of when you read to the children today, you were doing the work of teaching them love and justice, because you were giving them a story they could repeat. You were giving them images that looked like them, so they could repeat the story, and they had images that looked like them. And then they go home and say, Mom, will you read that story? The senator read it to me. Can you read it to me? And then it repeats over and over. And then over time, that story becomes embedded in you. And that's what we want to do. We want to embed some things in our children. The danger is there are corporations that are trying to embed some things in our children. And so that we have to be radical activists who are actively working to embed these stories of beauty and resiliency and love and justice and reciprocity and respect and grace and mercy in our children. It's not just dragging them to church and say, sitting here. It's also going home. And when you pray with your children, I mean, it's something real simple. It's praying over a meal. That's embedding a story. That's embedding a ritual in them. I'll never forget the story that was told by Samuel Barry McKinney. He was the pastor at Mount Zion Church in Seattle, and he was in Augusta, Georgia. We were serving in Augusta, and he talked about the fact that one of the moments that changed his life. He was, being a teen, doing what teens do. I ain't gonna listen to mom and dad, yada, 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 yada. And he had done something incredibly disrespectful to his parents. And, he was on punishment and all that, but he saw that his parents' door was open, and he heard some noise in the room, and he was peeking in, thought maybe his parents were fighting or something. He peeks into the room, and he sees his father and mother on their knees praying out loud for him. He said the image of his parents calling his name before God changed his life. He said from that moment on, he said, now I still messed up. He said, but something was embedded in me forever, that there's power when your child hears and power when your child sees. And he said, I wanted to do the same thing for my children, that they would see me on my knees praying for them. If we can embed these stories, we will see children that will embrace these ideals.
Thank you. The last question comes from Winston, who's 9, who's here. His question is for Dr. Warnock. He enjoyed reading your book, Put Your Shoes On and Get Ready. So what was it like being sworn in by Vice President Kamala Harris? Winston, can you stand up?
All right, Winston. Thank you for your question. It was amazing. And I'm deeply honored. And I'm deeply honored by your question. There I was being sworn in by the Vice President of the United States. But think about that history in that picture. Reverend Moss points out that I'm the first black senator from the state of Georgia, elected, by the way, at the same time Georgia in one fell swoop elected its first African-American senator and its first Jewish senator in one fell swoop. I think that's a good reason to rejoice. But I love it when I go to places and they say Georgia's first black senator, and I just want to be careful that we don't say it in a way that suggests that Georgia is a lagging indicator, because I'm only number 11 in the whole history of the country. I'm number 11. Think about that. In the whole history of the republic, I am only number 11. When Barack Obama was in the Senate, he was the only one. That's how rare a black senator has been in the history of our country. So think about that history. Here I am being sworn in, first black senator from Georgia, only the 11th in the whole history of the country, by the first black person, the first woman, and the first Asian person, vice president. Sworn in at the same time, being sworn in by her. So it was amazing. And I was there standing, and you can go back. We're on C-SPAN. So there's some footage on C-SPAN. I shouldn't say this because now folks are going to go look for it. It's on you. I was sworn in, and I wanted my children there. Chloe is 6, and Caleb is 4. And lately, Caleb has been obsessed with karate. Yeah. So I come down the aisle of the chamber. So there are two, you get sworn in twice. Once on the floor of the Senate, and actually nobody's standing there with you but some other senators, because we're the only ones who can be on the floor other than staff. And then there's really a ceremonial swearing in the old Senate chamber. Vice President's there and your family can be there. My children and I come down the aisle. This is a high and incredible moment. And I say, hello, Madam Vice President, and she's so sweet and kind, and she leans over, and she says hi to Chloe, and she says, hey, hi to Caleb. And Caleb tries to karate kick the Vice President. It's on C-SPAN. I've seen the... Thank God the Secret Service held their peace and didn't attack a 4-year-old. And she was so kind and gracious. It's really quite a moment. So I don't know that my son was all that impressed. He didn't know. He'll understand it better by and by.
Well, we want to thank everyone for being with us today for this conversation, for our book notes. We want to thank C-SPAN for being with us today and broadcasting. And we are going to have the book signing in the back. You want to give the announcements in reference to that? Yes, thank you.
Yes, hello. Before you exit this lovely, lovely sanctuary, we do have a bit of protocol for all of our lovely guests joining us today and members. Our protocol, I want to get this right, so I'm going to read it from my phone. We are asking that everyone exits out of the east door for the book signing in the atrium. It will be in, sales will still be in Montgomery Hall, so we were not doing any sales while service and book notes was going on. But we are asking that once your books are signed to exit through the west doors. No one will be able to come through the atrium west doors. All right, we thank you for cooperating in this lovely effort, and we will look forward to getting those books signed. Thank you.